In the early hours of March 28, 1942, an aging British destroyer, its hull packed with several tons of hidden explosives, rammed at full speed into the steel gates of a massive dry dock deep inside a heavily defended German-occupied French harbor. On board and racing alongside in a flotilla of small wooden boats were Commandos, whose mission, once the ship struck its target, was to fight their way ashore, destroy as much of the surrounding harbor infrastructure as possible by hand, and then somehow find a way to escape a heavily fortified enemy port while the entire German garrison scrambled to respond. Most of them would not make it out alive. This is the true story of the St Nazaire Raid, later remembered by the men who survived it and by British military historians ever since, simply as the greatest raid, a mission built around one of the most audacious ideas of the entire Second World War, turning an obsolete warship into a delayed action bomb and sailing it directly into the heart of enemy territory.
To understand why the British military was willing to risk so much on a single raid against a single dry dock, it helps to understand exactly what made that dry dock so strategically significant. The Normandy dock at St Nazaire, on France's Atlantic coast, was, at the time, the largest dry dock in the entire world, specifically constructed before the war to service the massive French ocean liner after which it was named.
By 1942, this single facility held genuine, outsized strategic importance for an entirely different reason, representing the only dry dock along the entire Atlantic coast of German-occupied Europe large enough to accommodate Germany's massive battleship Tirpitz, sister ship of the Bismarck, should that vessel ever require repair after being damaged in combat. The Tirpitz represented one of the most significant ongoing strategic threats facing British naval forces throughout this period of the war, an enormous, powerfully armed battleship whose mere existence, stationed in Norwegian waters, forced British naval commanders to maintain a substantial defensive naval presence, specifically to guard against the possibility that the Tirpitz might break out into the Atlantic and wreak havoc on the convoy shipping routes upon which Britain's wartime survival depended. The Tirpitz represented one of the most significant ongoing strategic threats facing British naval forces throughout this period of the war, an enormous, powerfully armed battleship whose mere existence, stationed in Norwegian waters, forced British naval commanders to maintain a substantial defensive naval presence, specifically to guard against the possibility that the Tirpitz might break out into the Atlantic and wreak havoc on the convoy shipping routes upon which Britain's wartime survival depended. This strategic burden imposed by the Tirpitz's mere existence proved genuinely significant to the broader British war effort, tying down substantial naval resources, including capital ships that might otherwise have been deployed to other theaters of the war, purely to maintain a defensive posture against the possibility of a Tirpitz breakout, a dynamic that Winston Churchill himself reportedly described in terms emphasizing just how disproportionately valuable the mere threat of the Tirpitz's potential deployment was to German strategic planning, regardless of whether the vessel ever actually engaged in significant offensive action. British naval planners understood that even without ever needing to actually sail into battle, the Tirpitz was already achieving a meaningful strategic effect simply by existing as a persistent, unresolved threat that Britain could not safely ignore. British military planners recognized that if the Normandy dock at St Nazaire could be destroyed or rendered unusable, the Tirpitz would lose its only viable Atlantic repair facility, meaning that any significant battle damage the battleship sustained during an Atlantic operation would force it to attempt the considerably more dangerous journey back to Germany itself for repairs, a calculation that British planners believed might meaningfully deter German naval commanders from ever risking the Tirpitz in Atlantic operations at all. This strategic reasoning led Combined Operations Headquarters, the same British command structure responsible for developing and coordinating various unconventional raiding operations throughout the war, to develop a plan for directly destroying the Normandy dock's massive gates, structures so large and robustly constructed that conventional aerial bombing was judged unlikely to inflict the kind of decisive, reliable damage the mission required, particularly given the near impossibility of achieving the necessary bombing precision against the target situated deep within a heavily populated French port city, where any bombing raid risked substantial civilian casualties without any guarantee of actually destroying the specific dock gates in question. The plan that emerged, genuinely audacious, even by the standards of the many unconventional raiding operations combined operations had already developed throughout the war, called for an old, expendable British destroyer to be packed with several tons of explosives concealed within specially constructed compartments, disguised sufficiently to pass, at least briefly under cover of darkness, as a legitimate vessel entering the harbor, before being deliberately rammed directly into the dock's outer gate at considerable speed, wedging the vessel firmly into the gate structure before its hidden explosive charge, set on a lengthy delayed timer specifically calculated to detonate only after the raiding force had time to withdraw, would ultimately destroy the gate entirely. The vessel selected for this one-way mission was HMS Campbelltown, an aging destroyer that Britain had received from the United States as part of an earlier wartime destroyers for bases agreement, a ship whose age and expendability made it a genuinely suitable candidate for a mission from which its planners fully expected it would never return. British engineers worked to modify the vessel specifically for the mission, reducing its weight and altering its silhouette to more closely resemble a German vessel of similar type, in hopes of buying additional precious minutes of confusion among German harbor defenders during the raiding force's final approach toward the dock, while concealing several tons of specially prepared explosives deep within the ship's hull, protected and disguised to survive the impact of the planned ramming maneuver and to remain concealed from German inspection during the crucial approach phase of the mission. The technical work required to prepare the Campbelltown for its role in the raid proved genuinely extensive, requiring engineers to remove 2 of the vessel's 4 funnels and modify the remaining 2 to more closely approximate the profile of a German MOVA-class torpedo boat, a disguise specifically intended to delay recognition by German coastal observers during the critical final approach phase, when every additional minute of uncontested passage meaningfully improved the raiding force's chances of successfully reaching its target before German defenses could fully mobilize. The explosive charge itself, consisting of several tons of amytal explosive material, was packed into specially reinforced steel tanks positioned within the ship's bow section, encased in concrete specifically to help the explosive charge survive the violent impact of the planned ramming maneuver intact, connected to a pencil-type delayed fuse mechanism, calculated to provide a multi-hour delay between the ship's impact with the dock gate and the charge's eventual detonation, timing specifically calculated to allow the raiding force sufficient opportunity to complete its broader mission objectives and attempt withdrawal before the explosion occurred. Beyond the explosive-laden Campbelltown itself, the raid's broader plan called for a flotilla of small motor launches, each carrying a contingent of specially trained Army commandos to accompany the destroyer into the harbor, with these commandos tasked with landing at various points around the harbor complex once the Campbelltown had successfully rammed its target, fanning out to destroy additional harbor infrastructure, including pumping stations, lock gates, and other facilities essential to the dock's continued operation, using demolition charges they would need to plant and detonate by hand under direct enemy fire, before attempting to withdraw back to the waiting motor launches for evacuation from the harbor before German reinforcements could overwhelm the raiding force entirely. Command of the overall raid was given to Commander Robert Ryder for the naval component of the operation, while the commando forces tasked with the actual demolition work ashore were commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Augustus Charles Newman, both officers overseeing extensive specialized training and planning in the weeks leading up to the raid, work that required coordinating an extraordinarily complex operation involving precise timing between the naval approach, the ramming maneuver itself, and the subsequent coordinated demolition operations that commando teams would need to execute ashore under what everyone involved understood would almost certainly be intense, immediate enemy resistance once the raiding force's presence within the harbor was inevitably discovered. On the night of March 27th into March 28, 1942, The raiding force, having successfully navigated a lengthy approach voyage across the English Channel while maintaining the disguise intended to delay German recognition of the force's true hostile intent, began its final approach into the Loire estuary towards St Nazaire harbor itself, with the Campbelltown flying a German naval ensign and displaying signal lamp responses specifically prepared to mimic legitimate German harbor traffic, buying the raiding force several additional crucial minutes of approach time before German shore defenses, growing increasingly suspicious of the approaching flotilla, finally opened fire directly on the raiding force as it made its final run toward the dock gates. This final approach phase required the raiding force to navigate the shallow, difficult waters of the Loire estuary at night, relying on carefully calculated tidal timing to ensure sufficient water depth for the Campbelltown's passage, while maintaining the disguised force's cover for as long as possible against increasingly suspicious German harbor authorities, who had, according to subsequent accounts, begun questioning the approaching vessel's identity and intentions through signal exchanges in the minutes before the raiding force's true hostile purpose finally became unmistakably clear. A British officer aboard the Campbelltown, fluent in German, reportedly handled several of these challenge exchanges personally, providing plausible responses specifically crafted to delay German recognition of the approaching force's actual nature for as long as operationally possible, buying precious additional minutes that proved genuinely significant to the raiding force's ability to close the remaining distance toward the dock gate before the full weight of German harbor defenses could be brought to bear against the approaching vessels. Despite this intense defensive fire, which inflicted significant casualties among the exposed crews aboard the various vessels comprising the raiding force, the Campbelltown successfully completed its primary mission objective, ramming directly into the Normandy dock's outer gate at considerable speed shortly after 1:30 in the morning, wedging itself firmly into the gate structure exactly as the mission's planners had intended, with its concealed explosive charge now set on its delayed timer, ready to detonate at a predetermined time still several hours in the future, specifically calculated to allow the raiding force sufficient time to complete its remaining objectives and, ideally, withdraw from the harbor before the massive detonation occurred. With the Campbelltown now successfully lodged in position, the commando teams aboard the accompanying motor launches began their own assigned tasks, landing at various points around the harbor complex under continuous, intense German defensive fire that inflicted severe casualties throughout this phase of the operation, fighting their way to their assigned demolition targets and working to plant and detonate explosive charges against the harbor's pumping station, lock gates, and other critical infrastructure, accomplishing a considerable portion of the raid's secondary demolition objectives, despite the genuinely severe sustained resistance German defenders mounted throughout the harbor complex once the raiding force's presence and hostile intent had become unmistakably clear. Individual commando teams had been assigned specific, carefully planned demolition targets throughout the harbor complex during the extensive preparation phase preceding the raid, with different groups tasked with disabling the dock's pumping machinery, essential for controlling water levels within the dock system, destroying the mechanical winding houses responsible for operating the dock's various gates and caissons, and targeting other infrastructure, whose destruction would compound the damage the Campbelltown's eventual explosion was expected to inflict on the facility's overall operational capability. These demolition teams worked under conditions of genuine, immediate danger, frequently engaging in close-quarters combat with German defenders, while simultaneously attempting to complete the technical, time-consuming work of properly placing and arming their demolition charges, a combination of combat and precise technical work that required considerable discipline and courage from commandos operating under continuous fire in unfamiliar, hostile territory. The raid's planned evacuation phase, however, proved to be catastrophically more difficult than the mission's planners had anticipated, with German defensive fire proving so intense and sustained that the majority of the small motor launches assigned to extract the commando teams from the harbor following the completion of their demolition work were destroyed or disabled before they could successfully complete their evacuation mission, leaving the majority of the commando force stranded within the harbor complex, facing an increasingly desperate tactical situation as German reinforcements continued arriving and systematically closing in on the scattered, isolated commando positions throughout the harbor. Facing this catastrophic breakdown of the planned evacuation, the stranded commando forces found themselves confronting an extraordinarily difficult tactical predicament, with many groups attempting to fight their way through the harbor and surrounding town in hopes of somehow escaping overland, while others made the decision to surrender once ammunition and any realistic hope of successful evacuation had been exhausted, resulting in the capture of a substantial portion of the raiding force's surviving commandos in the hours following the main assault. Prisoners who would spend the remainder of the war in German captivity following their capture during the raid's chaotic, costly final phase. Lieutenant Colonel Newman, the commando force's overall commander ashore, was among those ultimately captured following an extended attempt to lead a group of his men through the streets of St Nazaire in hopes of escaping the harbor area entirely, an effort that succeeded in evading immediate capture for a period of time, but that ultimately ended when the group, exhausted, low on ammunition, and increasingly surrounded by mobilizing German forces, was cornered and forced to surrender. Newman would spend the remainder of the war as a prisoner, though his conduct throughout the raid and its chaotic aftermath was subsequently recognized through the award of the Victoria Cross, reflecting the genuine leadership and personal courage he had demonstrated throughout the operation despite its ultimately unsuccessful outcome for his own personal escape. A small number of commandos, in a genuinely remarkable demonstration of resourcefulness and determination, did succeed in evading capture entirely, making their way overland through occupied France with assistance from local resistance sympathizers, eventually reaching neutral Spain, and from there successfully returning to Britain, joining the small number of naval personnel who had managed to escape the harbor aboard whichever motor launches survived the intense German defensive fire during the raid's final chaotic evacuation phase. This overland escape, undertaken by a small handful of commandos who managed to slip away from the harbor area before the full German response could be mobilized, required these men to navigate occupied French territory for an extended period, relying on the same kind of resistance support networks that had assisted numerous other stranded Allied military personnel throughout the war, moving cautiously through unfamiliar territory while maintaining constant awareness of the very real danger that discovery would result in capture or worse. An escape effort that succeeded for only a small fraction of the raiding force, but that nonetheless represented a genuinely remarkable individual achievement given the extraordinarily difficult circumstances these men faced following the raid's chaotic conclusion. The raid's ultimate strategic payoff arrived later that same day, when the Campbelltown's concealed explosive charge finally detonated as planned, an enormous explosion that completely destroyed the Normandy dock's outer gate and inflicted severe additional damage on the surrounding dock facility, an explosion powerful enough that it reportedly caught a group of German officers who had been inspecting the wrecked, grounded destroyer entirely by surprise, resulting in significant German casualties among personnel who had gathered around the vessel in the hours following the raid, apparently without full awareness of the enormous hidden explosive charge still concealed within the ship's hull. The delayed timing of the explosion, occurring many hours after the Campbelltown had initially rammed the dock gate, meant that German forces had spent much of the intervening period treating the grounded, apparently disabled vessel as a captured curiosity rather than as the still active weapon it actually remained, with reports indicating that German officers and personnel had gathered aboard and around the wrecked ship throughout the following morning to inspect it, entirely unaware that they were standing atop several tons of concealed explosive material on a delayed timer that had been ticking down since the previous night's raid. When the charge finally detonated, the resulting explosion inflicted casualties among this gathered German personnel that some historical accounts suggest may have numbered in the hundreds, representing a final, devastating strategic and psychological blow that arrived considerably after the raiding force itself had already been captured, killed, or scattered throughout the surrounding French countryside. A genuinely remarkable final act in an operation whose most significant strategic damage was ultimately delivered not during the raid's chaotic immediate combat, but hours later, through the patient, carefully calculated detonation the mission's planners had built into their original design from the very beginning. This delayed detonation succeeded completely in achieving the raid's core strategic objective, rendering the Normandy dock entirely unusable for the remainder of the war, a genuine, lasting strategic achievement that permanently eliminated the only Atlantic dry dock facility large enough to service the German battleship Tirpitz, contributing meaningfully to the broader strategic calculation that helped keep the Tirpitz effectively neutralized as a serious offensive threat to Atlantic convoy shipping for the remainder of the conflict, exactly the strategic outcome the raid's planners had originally envisioned when first developing the mission concept. The human cost of achieving the strategic objective proved to be extraordinarily severe, with the raiding force suffering casualty rates that reflected just how genuinely dangerous and, in many respects, close to suicidal the entire undertaking had actually been from its very conception. Of the roughly 600 men who had participated in the raid across its naval and commando components, well over half became casualties, killed, wounded, or captured during the operations phases, a casualty rate that stood among the most severe suffered by any single British raiding operation conducted throughout the entire Second World War. In recognition of the raid's extraordinary combination of tactical audacity, genuine strategic significance, and the severe personal sacrifice its participants had demonstrated throughout the operation, an unusually large number of Victoria Crosses, Britain's highest military honor for valor in combat, were awarded to participants in the raid, including posthumous awards to several men who had been killed during the operation, a formal recognition reflecting just how significant British military authorities judged both the raid's achievement and the sacrifice required to accomplish it to have genuinely been. In the years following the war, the St Nazaire Raid became widely celebrated within British military history and popular memory as one of the most audacious and successful special operations conducted by any Allied force throughout the entire conflict, commemorated through the nickname the Greatest Raid, a characterization that reflected both the raid's genuine strategic significance in permanently neutralizing the Normandy dock and the extraordinary combination of careful planning, technical ingenuity, and raw personal courage its execution had required from every participant involved, from the naval crews who guided the disguised, explosive-laden Campbelltown through heavily defended waters, to the commando teams who fought their way ashore under intense fire to complete the raid's broader demolition objectives, many of whom paid for that success with their own capture, injury, or death during the operation's genuinely brutal final phases. This has been Forgotten Frontlines. Every story we bring you is researched, written, and brought to life by the V-Team, because some battles deserve to be remembered, no matter how strange, no matter how forgotten. If this story moved you, like this video, share it with someone who loves history, and subscribe for more forgotten stories from the front lines of the past. We'll see you in the next one.